in
This
that.
conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so again, if you want continuing education credit for today, you need to make sure you're signed on with Valerie. And then when you finish up today, you need to send to Irene at Bakersfield ARC, and Valerie will put in the chat her email address, the three things that you learned today from this project. Now, if you were on the call last week, on this webinar last week, this is basically very similar to what we covered last week. Um, we have two communities of practice. One is for vocational and day services, and one is for residential. Today is the residential one. So a couple of the slides that had to do with providing people with a place to go and do and making sure that their day is meaningful or that their work is in the community and integrated. Those are not in today's presentation, but instead we have slides specifically dealing with residential issues. So if you were on this call last week, uh, much of this will look repetitive because it is. We are repeating what we did because there are different groups, and we're trying to focus on each of the two groups so that we can have material that's specific to the needs of each. And there are little differences. Under the federal rules, which I will share with you briefly, in 2014, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, it's called CMS, came out with a new set of rules for how services for people who with developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, should receive services if they are receiving federal dollars as part of their program. And how you know whether someone is receiving federal dollars is if they are on what is called the waiver program. Waiver is an interesting term. It came about because in 1981, there was a family who had a daughter who developed a pretty severe infection that ended up doing some neurological damage to her, and she was in the hospital and had to be in acute uh, hospital type setting. The family looked at the possibility of getting the necessary equipment and bringing her home and providing the care at home. What they were told was no, if she's in an institution, the government will pay for it. The federal government will pay for the cost of her care. However, if she goes home and lives with you all, we can't pay for that. Family actually petitioned, that was when Ronald Reagan was the president of the United States, uh, petitioned Ronald Reagan and said, no, we don't think people should live in institutions. We think people should live in home. And we feel our daughter would get much better care if she was living with us at home than she would be if she was at in the subacute hospital, which is where she was living. So Reagan directed his head of Health and Human Services to come up with a waiver so that the rule said you got to be in a hospital for the feds to pay for it. Waive that and allow this child to go home. Because of that one individual, her name was Katie Beckett. It was initially called the Katie Beckett waiver. Nowadays, it's called the Home and Community Based Waiver. But that started the movement. There were about nationwide, probably over 100,000 people living in institutions. In California, uh, at its peak, we had over 12,000 individuals living in state hospitals, later renamed developmental centers. So when you think about places like Porterville, Camarillo, Fairview, Stockton, Sonoma, Napa, uh, Agnews, those were all state hospitals that cared for people with developmental disabilities. Well, the thinking was, let's go ahead and change that. So as long as the cost is no greater than than what it would cost to have somebody in the institution, so equal to or less than what it would cost to have somebody at the State Developmental Center, let's bring that person back into the community with the resources that they need. And there was a program, and still is, called The Money Follows the Person. So the money that it costs at the state institution or hospital follows the person out into the community, and the funds that are available to provide for that person's services are equal to or less than what it would cost for them to be in the institution. Well, California, for example, went from, like I said, about 12,000 people in the institution to today, most of the institutions are closed. There's about 300 individuals who are living in Porterville who have been involved with the court system. We call them forensic. They were involved in some sort of activity that the court deemed uh, criminal or dangerous to themselves or others. And instead of going to prison, they're at Porterville. There are also some people in some short-term facilities throughout the state. The state has a couple of facilities that they run, but there's, less than probably about 500 people all total in the whole system. And the system is very different today than it was a number of years ago when we had the large institutions for most people's care. So the system has changed. Now, in 2014, the federal government said, okay, since we're paying for a good portion of this program, and in most states, and it depends on the state. In California, 50 cents on a dollar of every client who is Medicaid waiver is paid for by the federal government. So let's say, for example, if you're a level 4 facility and your rate is $5,000 a month for the type of care that you're providing, because you're providing fairly intensive care to your residents, 2,500 of that 5,000 is federal dollars. The other 2,500 is state dollars. And as my old boss a number of years ago used to say, I've got a take on the golden rule. He would say, he who has the gold makes the rules. So when the federal government said, okay, we're going to change the requirements, that came with the stick of our dollars to support your program are predicated on you doing what we say we want you to do. So if you provide the services according to our plan, then you will get these funds. If, on the other hand, you continue to do it the way you've done it for over the years in the past, we're not going to certify you. And if we don't certify you, then you're not eligible for the federal dollars. Now, the California had time to make the change. Originally, the rules came out in 2014. They were supposed to go into effect in March of 2019. When Donald Trump was elected president, his Health and Human Services director took a look at the rules and said, these are very intensive rules, a lot of stuff in these rules. I don't know that everybody can do it by 2019. So let's go and change it to 2021. So they gave everybody a 2-year extension on it. Well, in 2020, in March of 2020, we all went into stay-at-home mode when the COVID epidemic started. And much of the programming that we were providing was being done online with individual clients. It was clients were staying in the residential facility, weren't going to day programs. Where things changed very radically due to the state of emergency that the country was in. So at that time, the federal government said, okay, let's change the rules again and say 2023. So now we're looking at March of 2023 for implementation. Now, in our first year of this project, we worked, the Bakersfield ARC, myself, and some of my other staff worked very closely with Kern Regional Center and a number of providers. Some of you may have gotten technical assistance from us in how to go ahead and put together your program. Excuse me one moment. I got to take a break. Be right back.
Thank you all for your patience. And I'm just going to go ahead and run through again. I know that Jeff had mentioned it earlier. But he had mentioned it earlier that if you are on the call and you're just on here as caller and you want CEU credits, we're unable to give those if we don't have you identify yourself. So if there's a way that you can identify yourself, that would be great. Give us a name and regarding who is in attendance. We do take attendance at the beginning of the webinar, so if you didn't hear prior, credits come up.
Okay, I'm back. I'm sorry. It was one of those calls that I called them and they called me and then I called them. So we got it taken care of. So I appreciate you, your momentary patience there. So anyways, some of you worked with Kern Regional Center and with Leslie from Kern Regional Center and myself on getting your plan together so that we could figure out how to make it so that you were in compliance with the new rules. In California, the majority of providers and all of the providers at Kern Regional Center submitted plans which were accepted by the federal government for being in compliance with the new rules. What they need to do now, and what the feds wanted California to do, was actually to go out and look to see that people were doing what they said they were going to do. So it's one thing to put it on a piece of paper that you're making these changes. It's another thing to actually make the changes. Now, some of you may have heard the story that from a recent situation that I was told, but Leslie from Regional Center told me she went out to a facility recently and a client proudly showed her the key to his room. Hey, I've got privacy now. I've got a key, the lock to my door. Oh, and by the way, this key fits all the doors to all the other clients' bedrooms. So that didn't fit the new rules because that didn't really establish privacy, because if there's one key that fits all, it's not really a lockable space that client has. So there's one thing to write it down on paper, to try to implement it. It's another thing to make sure that you are in full implementation. So California asked for more time. And the federal government has told California they can have until March of 2024. And then they have to start really doing evaluations and looking at homes to make sure that those homes are meeting the new rules. So at some point, either the federal government's going to come out, state inspectors, or Kern Regional Center is going to come out and take a look at probably some of your homes to see what's going on. They may interview you, they may interview your clients, they may look at your facility. There's other things. If they find you're not in compliance, then there may be sanctions or other things that could potentially go on. We don't know what that is yet because the state and the federal government haven't come to an agreement on what happens. Worst case scenario. So this is it could be a number of different things. They could give you a chance to correct and then get it together and do this and do that. But on the worst side of the coin, the feds could come in and say, oh, wait a minute, we gave you a chance to get this corrected. You didn't get it corrected. You signed a form years ago when you first became a provider that you were going to be in compliance with the Medicaid waiver rules. You're not. And therefore, we're not going to pay you anymore. Just like some medical offices that take Medi-Cal or Medicare, the state comes in or the feds come in and say, well, we don't think you're doing services right by our patients, so you're no longer a Medicare or Medi-Cal provider. The same thing could happen with your potential facility. That's why it's so important. Although we don't know, and I don't want to scare anybody or tell you something that, because I don't know the future any more than you know the future, but it's something to think about, in that being in compliance is the best way to protect your facility. So I want to think positively and say, okay, do it right, and then there's no problem. So that's the direction that we really want to go. So with that, I want to move forth to the first. Well, before I do that, well, one last thing. This is a series of communities of practice. There will be one every month on day and vocational services, and that will be the second Wednesday of every month. The third Wednesday of every month will be on residential, and then the fourth Wednesday will be a webinar. The webinars will be an hour and a half. The other programs will be like today are 1 hour. And Irene, the administrative coordinator for the project, will be putting out, she'll be sending you out email blasts if you're not on the email list. That's the other thing you can do when you see the down in the chat, Irene's email. You can ask her to get put on the email list, and she'll make sure that you get everything. She's going to be sending out a blast today for the classes that will be done in November. So we will be offering, classes on cultural competency and what is a meaningful life. So those are going to be our topics for next month. So keep posted. These are free. They're available. In addition to this, there is a newsletter that comes out once a month, and in that newsletter, there's usually a topic related to this area, home and community-based waiver. Encourage you to read it. If you have an event or something in your facility that you would like to share with people, one of your clients made a huge milestone or did something and they're okay with sharing, because we have confidentiality we have to be concerned about, we can go ahead, and we'd love to be able to put success stories into our newsletter. In addition to that, at the bottom of the newsletter where it says updates, there's usually about 2 or 3 free webinars that are sponsored by the National ARC, by the State Developmental Disabilities Council, by United Cerebral Palsy, by a number of groups have webinars that are out there in the community. I look and try to find them and put them in that newsletter that goes out monthly. So there's other training opportunities that are there for you. So with that being said, I'm going to now move to the slides 20 minutes into the presentation. The first slide talks about the home and community-based waiver final rules. Now, there are 10 rules that are in the home and community-based waiver program. Rules 1 through 5 are for everyone. So anyone who falls under the home and community-based waiver rules, and residential facilities do, day programs do, and there's others that do. If anybody is interested in getting a copy of the list of all the programs that fall under HCBS waiver, they can either contact Leslie at Regional Center or contact Valerie, and we can get that out to you. But just suffice it to say, if you're a residential care provider, you fall under the HCBS waiver rules. Okay, so there are additional 5. So there's the 5 that cover everybody, and then there's an additional 5 that are just specific to residential. So day and vocational follow 5 rules, residential follow 10 rules. So we're going to talk a little bit about those, just an overview today. I do have a presentation which we did last month, in which we can do again if there's some demand for it, which goes over all 10 of the rules and goes into some specificity on each. provide full access to the benefits of the community living for people who use HCBS. So, in a nutshell, what that means is that people who are getting HCBS services are supposed to have full access to the community. Some of you may have been at Kern Regional Center in late July, early August when Dr. Pomerantz came and did a presentation. And one of the things he was very adamant about was if it is something that you would like to do. So if it's not something that you would like to do or not something you would like to have happen to you, why do you necessarily think it should be happening to people who are intellectually or developmentally disabled? So the Fed's overriding concern is that people have access to the community, that someone's day is not living in the residential care facility, getting up in the morning, getting dressed, having breakfast, getting on a bus with their lunch, going to a program where they sit in the program until 2:30 in the afternoon, then come home and then spend the rest of their day, have dinner, everything is in the residential care facility, so that their whole access to the community, with maybe the exception of their family coming to visit or a medical appointment, is either community is day program or residential. That's not what they want. They want people to have full access to the community. So just like you and I go out and do things in the community, have hobbies, go to church, see friends, go out to see a movie, bowling, whatever we all do, our clients should have the same access to the community. Okay, it talks about supporting people who use home and community-based services to choose the most integrated setting possible for their services. Now, what that means is we want people to be with non-disabled individuals as much as that is possible. Years ago, someone told me, and it stuck with me over the years, that some of our clients, some of the people we work with, the only non-disabled person that they have in their lives are people who are paid to be with them. So if you think about that for a second, that means that if you live in a residential care facility, you have your staff there. You get on the bus, you have the bus driver. You get to your program, you have the program staff. You come home, it's your staff again, and that's the only contact you have with anybody outside of another disabled person that either lives in your home or is part of the same program that you're in. And that's not what we want to see. We want people integrated so that they're involved with everyone else, so that we really start trying to get away from the distinction of the disability and look at community. Years ago, one of my colleagues had something on her door that said we should be labeling jars, not people, that we shouldn't be putting labels on people because then that tends to segregate them. And that's not what we want to do. We want people to be fully integrated into the community. Improve the quality and safety of HCBS and protect the rights of people who use HCBS. Now, safety is a very major concern. That one of the things that one of the reasons that you all are required by Title 17 to file special incident reports when something happens, it's twofold. One is just so that people are aware of what the event is, but two is what we call closing the loop. What can we do in the future to make sure that we take care of this person? So if there were injuries or there was a problem, we make them as whole as we can. And two, to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So part of what we're looking at, if in a community outing someone has an ambulation issue, how do we address that so the next time they go out into the community, they're safer in terms of that. But there's also something that we talk about, and we're going to talk about this more in another session, that's called dignity of risk. And dignity of risk is that if we never take any risks, nothing ever happens wrong. But then we really don't live. We live. It's like living in a bubble. You never, because life is about taking risks. Every time we get in our car, every time we do other things, there's a certain amount of risk involved, and so it's weighing how much risk in the client's life versus the safety issue is a challenge, especially a challenge for those of you who provide residential services. And like I said, we will get into that in some more depth at a later date. Okay, home and community-based waiver final rules. People people with and without disabilities coexist in the same neighborhoods, respect each other's rights and dignity. So the same neighborhood that your facility is in, you have neighbors. Do you know your neighbors? Do your clients know your neighbors? Are they involved with the neighborhood? If there's some sort of a yeah, barbecue, I have a neighbor across the street who loves to have barbecues, and so we all bring over potluck, items, and we, with some frequency, we have neighborhood barbecues at my neighbor's house, and that's a number of members of the neighborhood. So if you have activities involved in your neighborhood, or then your residents should be involved in that as well. People receive the necessary supports and accommodations to fully participate in the community activities and events. Now, this depends a lot on what the individual's service and support needs are. So someone who has a greater need for support may need more staff assistance, may need extra time or training to be able to utilize the community. So someone who has medical issues, issues with ambulation, getting maybe the use of a wheelchair or other devices, may have hearing or vision challenges, may have challenges with behavioral health and mental health. These are all issues that need to be reviewed, and to try as much as possible to provide the person with the accommodations they need so that they can be in the community. We don't want to say, well, because Johnny has major temper tantrums when he's out where there's a lot of people, so we can't take Johnny out anywhere. No, let's try to figure out a way that, or maybe take him out someplace where there are fewer people, where it's quieter setting, or figuring out some way to get this individual into the community, and not just use, again, the disability as a reason not to provide a level of services. People have freedom and autonomy to choose where they live from a range of options and choices that suit their preferences and needs. So we want to make sure that people have an understanding of what's out there. So if they're living in your residential home, was that a choice that they made? And if they did make that choice, do they still want that choice? So really, there are a number of options for residential living. Everything from people living in their own apartment, getting supports to supported living services. There's family home agencies. There's residential care facilities. There's group homes. So we want to make sure that people understand the different types of settings, and then they make the choice. It's like you or I, we choosing where we want to live, what neighborhood we want to live in, are we living in an apartment, are we living in a home, are we sharing our residence with others, are we living with our family? So what is our living arrangements? And so that's what we want to ask clients too. What sort of living arrangements would you like, and where would you like to be, and how would you like to live there? People engage in various community roles and contribute, such as work, education, volunteering, leisure. Try to get your individuals involved in some sort of a community activity. If you're involved, let's say, in a church, maybe there's some sort of a volunteer service that your church does. They've adopted a roadway that they go out and help pick up the litter, or they do, some sort of a community service at a youth group, these are just examples. But think about this: we're only limited by our own creativity in terms of what we want to do, but we want to try to get clients involved in the community. And a number of years ago, I was involved with the Bakersfield Exchange Club. And I said to my fellow members, hey, what about someone from the community who has a developmental disability being part of our group? And they said yes. And so we did that. And, this individual was an active member of a service club here in Bakersfield. So it really, again, think about what people can do and how they can really be involved. People who live in rural areas have access to transportation and mobility options that enable them to participate in community life in the same way that other people who live in that community. So I don't think there's anybody on the phone call today from some of our more rural communities, especially the east side of the Sierras, but suffice it to say that we don't expect people living in Ridgecrest or Bishop to do the same things necessarily that people in Bakersfield do. So, okay, here are some do's and don'ts. For those clients who are working, we want them to be paid a fair wage and to be valued in their work. We want them to participate in social and cultural activities in the community. We want them to be able to, wherever as much as possible, to be able to manage their own money. I know there is personal and incidental monies in residential care facilities, and you have to have an accounting for licensing and Social Security on how that money is being spent. But they should be able to have some control over their own funds to the extent, again, functional ability and other issues sometimes come into this. And this is where you work with your service coordinator, with the client, with their families, and try to develop a plan to give the client the greatest amount of control over their funds as possible. Access community-based services that meet the individual's needs. So we want to find community services that meet the individual needs. And when we talk about community services, what's available at your local parks and recreation? What's available at the community center? Maybe the senior center. There may be some other places that you could go with your individuals that are in the community activities. This last weekend, there were 3 or 4 things. There was a Greek festival. There was something at the Kern County Museum. There was, the Tehachapi Apple Fest. There were 3 or 4 activities in the community that someone could partake in. Just as an example. What we don't want to do is people only join community or planned trips or outings, so that everything is planned at the facility. We go with other clients, or we do this, or we go as our own group, and no one else is really integrated into the activity. Staff decide the activity without consulting people or preferences. So we don't want that you, as the staff, say, okay, this is where we're going to, we need to go on trips because the rules say we do, and this is where we're going to go, and this is how we're going to do this, and then we'll come back at the end of the day. People do the same few activities in the community without exploring different alternatives. At Bakersfield ARC, when we first started looking at doing our services in the community rather than at our program site when we used to be on South Union there, we found that when we asked clients, well, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? We got pretty much the same answer from everybody. It was Valley Plaza, Walmart, Dollar Tree. Sometimes they said bowling as well. Those were the activity that a lot of these individuals knew. There were all kinds of other community outings and activities that were available to them, but because they had no idea that they were there, they didn't know it. So part of what we did initially was expose people to different things. So let's say, for example, the Buena Vista Museum on Chester Avenue, where they have the dinosaurs and things. Some clients went out there and said they like it. There was one client who said, no, I'm scared. I don't like all the bones. So we knew for that person, we don't take them there. So we really looked to see what was out there and what was available, and then tried to develop a service array around that. Okay, important when you're doing individual program planning. Okay, this is where you're sitting down with the service coordinator, the client, if there's any other, if there's a day program or anybody else involved in that client's life, that you're developing this plan. And the plan needs to be around what the client wants. What, you know, there's the old thing of what's important to and what's important for someone. So we want to make sure we're doing that. The person is the director of their own life and has the right to make choices about their future. So they should be able to be, no, you can't do that. That's not something that's right for you. We don't want to go there. That's not what we're all about. We want to be moving forward with what the client's talking about. Years ago, I was talking with someone who was from another agency, and they said, "Oh, well, you know, this is good in principle, but what if the client tells you they want to be an astronaut?" And no, they're not going to be an astronaut. Well, okay, but why don't we talk about maybe we do a trip out to Edwards Air Force Base, to the museum out there, and have them take a look at what some of the activities are out there, and then maybe there's a volunteer club here in town or out at Mentor's Field that they can get involved with, that they can do activities related to aerospace. So they may not be able to do exactly what they were saying, but something clearly that has to do with their interest and the direction that they would like to see. The person decides who they want to involve in their planning process, such as family, friends, or professionals. Client says, "I want my family at my meeting." Family can be at the meeting. Client says, "I do not want my family at the meeting." Family is not invited then. It's the client's choice as to who comes. The person chooses when and where they want to have their planning meeting and how often they want the review. The law says that the Lanterman Act, the California law that makes developmental disability services and regional centers, says that the plan needs to be written at least once every 3 years. For residential clients, it basically is once every year. But that doesn't mean that the client can't ask for it more often. So if there's a need to make changes to a client's plan, the client can ask for a addendum to their plan, a change in their plan, or they can ask to have their meeting reconvened, and the regional center has to reconvene the meeting within 30 days. The person sets their own goals and priorities based on the strengths, interests, and needs. Again, finding out what that person likes, what they're good at, what they can do well, and we don't want to do things that are going to make the client feel uncomfortable or not want to be involved with. We want things that they want to participate in and feel like that they're valued and it's an activity that is of their interest. Planned outings, who will do what and when to support the person's activities. So we should be thinking about where we're going to go, what we're going to do, how we're going to plan that, and how do we do that in a way that's as integrated as possible with the general community. The plan is written in a way that the person can understand, and using plain language, pictures, or other formats that suit them. So you want to make sure that when you're writing the plan, you're not writing it in, the sort of language. So one of the things that people accuse me of sometimes, and they're right, is I use a lot of alphabet soup. So I may be talking and I might say HCBS, IPP, IFSP, QRP, and people go, what in the heck is he talking about? So we need to make sure that the language we use is language that people fully understand and are comfortable with. Okay, people have individual rights. They have a right to privacy, and they can choose whether to be alone or with others at home. So if somebody wants to be in their room, especially now that the rules say that they can have a lock on their door, it's essential for people to be able to manage their own space and information. We also want to keep everything that we do about the client private. There are in California, the law says anything that that takes place related to that individual is confidential, and it's very limited on how we can go about sharing it. So when in doubt, don't share unless you understand the law and know what is and what isn't in terms of being able to share. Dignity, we want to make sure that the quality of being able to do things that matter for them, express themselves, and be who they are and want to be. It is essential for people to have confidence and value in themselves. We want to make sure that people feel comfortable in their lives and that we're encouraging them. I one time was at a conference that was on a slightly different subject. It was on attention deficit disorder, but it said that kids who had attention deficit, because they were so hyperactive in many cases, they got told what they were doing wrong 4 times to every 1 time they were told what they were doing right. So think about that in terms of how you perceive yourself when you have others around you telling you what you're not doing right. And so we don't really want to go in that direction. We want to go in a direction of talking to people about, hey, we really want to encourage. We're not going to. We're to the extent we can, we're going to ignore the behavior that isn't what we want, and we're going to try to encourage the behavior of what we want and what the person really wants in terms of. And so we're going to try to figure out ways to figure out what it is that they want and to implement strategies that encourage that and provide for that. And then respect is an attitude of having high regard for people's feelings, property, wishes, rights. So we want to make sure that we really respect the person. It's not like they're the client and I'm the staff. We're equals. So how do we go ahead about showing the same respect for the client as we sort of expect that the clients and their families and the regional center, everybody respects us. So we want to make sure we do that. Okay, a couple of things I'm going to, time is sort of running away a little bit here, so I'm going to go over. Okay, so I want to talk about a few things about specifically to residential facilities. Some of the rights that tenants with disabilities should have in their house. The federal government talks about a lease or other legally enforceable agreement that protects them from eviction without due process or reasonable accommodations. Now, in California right now, what is being accepted is when your client first moved into your home, the regional center brought over an admissions agreement. And that admissions agreement is basically the agreement between the client and you, client and the family, so that is being accepted. California, there's a group, a task force that's working on trying to firm this up a little bit and to make it more in compliance with the federal rules. But for currently, if you have a current admissions agreement signed by the regional center, by the client, by you, or the client's legal representative, then you're in compliance with the rule at the moment. Privacy includes the ability to lock their bedroom doors, access lockable home entrance with keys or codes. So clients should be able to get access to the room, access to the house. Choice of where and with whom they live, as long as they meet the eligibility criteria and pay the rent. So this can be a challenge because especially if you've been in the business for a while and you have clients who have been living in the same room for 5 or 8 years, and the client says all of a sudden says, well, I don't want to live with Johnny anymore, and you don't have any other room in your home. And the client says, I still want to live here, but I don't want to live here. And none of the other clients want to move. I mean, there are times that this is not necessarily practical, but to the extent possible that a client can make a choice about where they want to live, with whom they want to live, what sort of living arrangements. Some people want roommates, some people don't want roommates. It depends. How is your home set up? If you're a newer home, more than likely you have some individual bedrooms, or all your bedrooms are individual. If you're been in the business for a while, the old model was 2 to a bedroom. So it really depends on the situation. Freedom to furnish and decorate their living spaces according to their preferences and needs. I had a young man who wanted to put up, some posters in his bedroom of scantily clad women. Provider said, no, this is a fairly religious home. We don't allow that, what we consider to be pornographic in our home. Can't do that. Client's room, client space. They can choose what they want to have in their room. If that becomes an issue where the two can't get it resolved, then we need to look at whether this is the appropriate living arrangement for that individual, because clearly the choice of what their furnishings clashed with the desires of the provider in terms of their worldview. Freedom to okay. People should have control of their schedules and activities without interference from the landlord or service provider. So if I come home from my day program, yeah, this is really kind of an issue because usually dinner is prepared at a certain time. And so, you want to work with the clients and say, okay, here's our home schedule. This is what we want to do. And these are times that you can basically do what you want to do. This is when dinner is going to be ready. If you're not here for dinner, how can we make other arrangements with you to make sure that you, get your dinner and things. So it is really the client's schedule. It's their home. They need to be involved in making their own set. Access to food at any time, either by cooking in their own kitchens or ordering delivery. Clients can get food when they want it. There are exceptions. Again, there is for example, a disorder called Prader-Willi syndrome. People don't know when they're full. They will continue to eat. They need to have food restrictions. There's sometimes people with blood sugar issues, diabetes, other high cholesterol, other gluten-free diets, certain things that require that food maybe needs to be restricted or access needs to be restricted. And if that's the case, it needs to be written into the plan for that person. So when you're sitting down and writing the IPP, if there's some reason that they can't have access to the kitchen, then you need to do that. Again, what access do they have to using the oven, the microwave, the stovetop? Individualized, needs to be developed of each plan, and that needs to be worked on for each client in your home. Visitors of their choosing at any time, as long as they respect the house rules and do not disturb the other tenants. So again, you can have house rules about visitors. And if I'm coming into your home, when I first come in, you can say, okay, if you want to be a resident of this home, these are our house rules in regards to visitors. Can't disturb other residents. Also, common sense can come into the equation. Client takes the get bus to and from their job every day and then comes home. And they come home and then they've got a stranger with them and say, oh, here's my new best buddy. I just met him on the bus. We're going to go into my room, lock the door, whatever. You have certain responsibilities as a provider to safeguard that individual, and especially if that individual in the past has had some challenges, socially, maybe something that you need to look at in terms of your house rules. And again, addressing with your service coordinator and with the client to make sure that it's addressed with as much respect and dignity for the client and choice. And again, people have dignity of risk, but we also don't want to put people in potential harm either. Physical accessibility means that the house is designed or modified to accommodate the mobility, sensory, and cognitive impairments. So if your home is set up for individuals who are non-ambulatory, which means that in case there's an emergency that they would need assistance in leaving the building, so fire, earthquake, etc. And that's not only just ambulation, walking. It could be hearing, could be vision, could be other issues that make it so that it could be behavioral challenges that make it so that person is not able to exit independently. You need to have the reasonable accommodations necessary to make sure that we can, that the person has access both in and out. Let me see. Yeah. Um, the expression of individual independence, autonomy, and independence. Um, express desires to initiate new projects can boost one's confidence and creativity. So, getting clients involved with a new activity and having them be successful at it can really help someone move forward in their development. So, we really want to look at wherever we're possible doing that. Uh, doing things independently can enhance one's skills and self-reliance. So we want clients to be able to develop more community-based skills so that they can move forward in their development. Um, seeking help or feedback when needed can also improve one's performance and learning. So that's not only for our clients, but it's also for us. So if we need help in how we develop new programs, I'm stuck. I need to get my clients out in the community more, but I'm not quite sure, what's a good activity or where to go or how do I go about doing it? What can you tell me? Feel free to get a hold of Valerie. Feel free to get a hold of Leslie over at Kern Regional Center. We can talk to you about innovative ideas, creative things that you can do so that you can make sure that your facility is in full compliance. With that, I'll take questions. If you have a question, just click on the mic button, open up your mic, and go ahead and ask it. Okay, again, if there are no questions, I'll leave it open for another minute or two. If you do want the 1 unit of or 1 hour of continuing education for today, please make sure that you send 3 items that you learned from my discussion today to Irene over at Kern Regional Center, and she will send you a certificate for the 1 unit of credit for today's presentation. One last attempt. Okay, if you want to make a question, go ahead and open up your mic. Okay, going, gone. Okay, we're going to go ahead and close this down for today. So thank you for all for attending, and best of luck.
Thank you, Jeff.
Bye bye.